Hey, it's the Comics Kid 2099, and I'm here to talk to you about the X-Men films. A few days ago, there was some pretty mind-blowing news. No, I'm not talking about when Disney bought Star Wars, although, yes, that was huge. I'm talking about when it was revealed that Bryan Singer, the man who directed the first two X-Men films, will be returning to direct the next X-Men film. Now, this is pretty awesome for me, because I like those first two X-Men films, and then I really enjoyed X-Men First Class. About a week or two ago, whenever it was revealed that Matthew Vaughn was not going to be directing the X-Men Days of Future Past film, I was kind of, oh no, what's going to happen? Who are they going to get to direct? Are they going to get Brett Ratner again? Oh no. So, I was really, really happy when they got Bryan Singer again. And now, I want to take this place right here to talk a little bit about what I think is going to happen in the next X-Men movie. If you haven't heard, the next X-Men film will be called X-Men Days of Future Past. Also, I've heard it's going to be called X-Men First Class Days of Future Past, which, let's hope that they kind of change that title up a little bit. I mean, I don't think they need the First Class subtitle in each of the movies set in this franchise. That's just dumb. If you weren't aware, X-Men Days of Future Past is my favorite X-Men story. I even like it more than the Dark Phoenix saga. This is huge for me. I'm very much on the edge of my seat. I'm really worried that they're going to mess this up and I'm going to be weeping for weeks. For a while now, even way before Matthew Vaughn decided not to direct this film, we've known a few things about this movie. When he was still set to direct, Matthew Vaughn said that he would like to open the film with Magneto assassinating John F. Kennedy. He would explain all the weird magic bullet stuff by saying that Magneto used his magnetic powers to guide the bullet. I wasn't exactly crazy about the way that Magneto, after knowing Charles Xavier for like 2 weeks, turns evil. And I say evil because Magneto's kind of in that morally gray area where he thinks he's doing the right thing and the ends justify the means and that sort of thing. I'm not exactly crazy with the idea that opening up the next movie, Magneto is full-blown killing people just because. But then, when I found out that the movie was going to be based on X-Men Days of Future Past, something occurred to me. In the comic book, the whole story revolves around a middle-aged Kitty Pryde coming back to the past in the body of her 13-year-old self, trying to prevent the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from assassinating Senator Robert Kelly. Because the assassination is what kicked off this whole crap future that she lived in. Since we've already seen Robert Kelly in the first couple of X-Men movies, I kind of doubt that we're going to be seeing him here. If we did, he'd be, well, wouldn't even be old enough to be a senator, I don't think. What if, for the movie version of X-Men Days of Future Past, instead of going back in time to prevent the death of a senator, one of the X-Men from the future comes back in time to prevent Magneto's Brotherhood from killing John F. Kennedy? Your mind is blown. If they did this, there are still two paths that they could travel. On the one hand, they could take an older version of like Banshee or Havoc, who appeared in First Class, and have them come back to the past to stop Magneto from killing John F. Kennedy. Or they could take like Iceman or Kitty Pryde from X-Men 3 and have them come to the past. Bryan Singer said, after he was confirmed to be directing this film, that he wanted to connect all of the X-Men movies. It's well known that there are a lot of little contradictions between all of these movies, and having Ellen Page as Kitty Pryde come back in time to stop some bad event from happening, well, that'd be a really great way of connecting these movies, even though there's a lot of contradictions. And then Kitty Pryde could be stuck in the 1960s with this new team, which would be the first team for her, and then you could just explain all the contradictions found in the previous movies and say, okay, problems with time travel, ripple effects, stuff like that. Screenwriter Simon Kinberg, who wrote X-Men The Last Stand, will be writing X-Men Days of Future Past, and he said that this movie will have a big focus on Magneto. In the comics, in the dark future where adult Kitty Pryde comes from, Magneto is in the concentration camp with Kitty, Franklin Richards, and Storm. I'm wondering if this movie is going to spend a great deal of time in this dark alternate future, and an older Magneto, maybe played by Ian McKellen, is going to be the focus of the story. I don't know if they could make him the focus of the story, but if they made him a central character in this dark future, I think I'd be okay with that. Having old Magneto somehow be aware that he is the reason the future sucks, that would be really cool. So it would add this layer of old Magneto's telling this younger mutant, hey, you need to go back in time and prevent me from being an idiot and killing John F. Kennedy. And that's the second path that they could go with. Instead of taking one of the X-Men we've already seen from the original trilogy and having them come back in time, they could also take a brand new mutant, someone like Lucas Bishop, and then have him be from this dark alternate future and come back to the 1960s to prevent all of this from happening. So I guess really there's three paths they could take. You could have older Havoc or Banshee come back in time, you could have Ellen Page as Kitty Pryde come back in time, or you could have like a brand new character like Lucas Bishop come back in time. Those are the three paths as I see them. Now, I mentioned earlier that Bryan Singer wants to do all this connectivity between all the X-Men movies. I'm definitely on board with this. However, no matter how hard you try, they're just not going to be able to iron out all the kinks here. How are they going to explain that Charles Xavier was crippled in the 1960s, is able to walk in the 1980s, and then is crippled again in the 2000s? It just doesn't make sense. But if they are able to say that all of these movies do count as some broad world and any discrepancies can just be explained away with time travel, I'd be totally okay with that. It's kind of unclear when exactly this movie is going to take place. Matthew Vaughn, when he was still directing, he said that he wanted it to take place in the latter half of the 1960s. There'd be references to the Rolling Stones, Flower Power, that sort of thing. Now that he's not directing, I think he's producing, I'm not really sure if we can take that at face value anymore. Lauren Shuard Donner, the wife of director Richard Donner, she said that it might take place in the 1970s, which maybe it will, maybe it won't. An article on iFanboy, which I will be linking to here, said that someone, an anonymous source, has read the script and says that it takes place in the 1980s. So basically, we're getting mixed signals here. It's going to take place sometime in the 20th century. Since this is a time travel story, the way I'm hoping it's going to happen is that our movie will open in the 1960s, with Magneto probably trying to kill John F. Kennedy. Then maybe we'll cut forward 20 years to this dark, dystopic 1980s, where Magneto is older and he's in a concentration camp with some younger mutants, and he sends one of them back in time. And then we go back to the 1960s, where the rest of our movie will take place, and then you've got your time-traveling mutant, either Kitty Pryde, Lucas Bishop, or older Havoc, and then he goes to the X-Men and says, here's what Magneto's planning. Old Magneto sent me to stop young Magneto. Let's go stop him right now. And then you would end the movie with a slightly altered version of the first scene from the movie, where Magneto's trying to kill John F. Kennedy and probably the X-Men stop him. And then you might hint that that dark future might happen anyway, because this is X-Men Days of Future Past. So in theory, you could have the 1960s and the 1980s, and then the 1970s thing, just ignore that. Just some last minute thoughts here. Bryan Singer said that Wolverine might feature in this movie. Not really sure how I feel about this. On the one hand, I didn't really mind that he cameoed in X-Men First Class. I mean, I wasn't rolling on the floor laughing like other people were, but, I mean, I didn't mind. I'm not really sure if you can just keep doing that. Like, hey, let's throw in Hugh Jackman again. I guess if we're doing that whole plot that I just mentioned, maybe he might be one of the mutants in the future who's, like, part of this underground movement. I think this is kind of complicated by the fact that The Wolverine, coming out in 2013, is set after X-Men The Last Stand, and it's not a prequel like we originally thought it would be. I'm not sure if they're going to try and connect The Wolverine to X-Men Days of Future Past. Personally, I'd rather just have two separate X-Men movies coming out back-to-back like that. Have The Wolverine be set in the future after X-Men The Last Stand, and then have Days of Future Past be this weird prequel thing that's trying to bridge all these movies together and don't connect them at all. If they are going to use Wolverine in this movie, I'd rather it be in the way that he was used in the X-Men Days of Future Past comic book, where he's this resistance fighter who's helping the guys who are in the concentration camp, but he's not necessarily in it himself. They could even do that really awesome scene where the Sentinel blasts him and all you see is his adamantium skeleton. That'd be cool. James McAvoy said that if he comes back for a sequel, and he is, that he'd like to play Charles Xavier closer to what Patrick Stewart was playing him as in the original trilogy. That would be cool. Yes, awesome. Do that. Please. What I love about prequels, when they're done right, is that you're seeing a character who you're already familiar with, but they act nothing like the character that you are familiar with. You see this character who acts nothing like the one that you know, and you slowly get to see them become the character that you know. That's the mark of a good actor, and I have full faith in James McAvoy that he can do it. I have full faith in Bryan Singer that he can direct him to do this. While we're on that subject, I'd really like to see Jennifer Lawrence kind of become the Rebecca Romijn version of Mystique. While I didn't hate her performance in the movie, I kind of feel like she wasn't playing the same character as Rebecca Romijn. So, something to think about. Something that's not even a prediction at all. Filming is going to begin in January of 2013, and then the film is going to come out in 2014. So basically, we've got about a year and a half for this movie to come out, and there's a lot that could happen in between now and then. I mean, 2 weeks ago, if you had asked me who was directing the next X-Men movie, I would have said Matthew Vaughn. Now, that's no longer true. So, with all of this stuff that seemingly doesn't really work together, I've tried to piece it together in the best way that I could, in the way that I am familiar with the comics, so I kind of know what's going on there, and I'm trying to think of how the movie is going to adapt that. But basically, this whole video exists so that I can tell you that I don't know what's going to happen. I don't really think anyone knows just yet, and we can't make any educated guesses until, well, we're a little closer to time for the movie to come out and we're seeing more information about what's going to happen. Until then, I just want you to know, just because you're feared and hated by a world you're sworn to protect doesn't mean you can't do it in style. I'll see you next time.